And this is where I'd like to invite great colleague of mine, Robert Radovanovic, who is going to take us through how to think critically. Rob, come on.
Hello, everyone. Thanks. My name is Robert Radovanovic. What we're going to talk about today is this whole concept of critical thinking. One of the big challenges that you folks are all going to be facing as you go through this program is you're trying to build out new business solutions. You're trying to figure out market fit. You're trying to figure out what your team's going to look like, how you're actually going to achieve these objectives that you're looking to do. And an important part to avoiding getting stuck, spinning your wheels, et cetera, is a strategic way towards actually thinking critically about all the assumptions, all the processes, all the steps that you're going to be going through on the way. Now, a little bit about myself before we get into it. I describe myself as a practical knowledge enthusiast. I started my career a long time ago, starting an engineering company by the name of Sarpoint Engineering, where we were really focused on cutting edge mapping, environmental assessment, engineering design tools. It was a real skunk works of people who are working on leading edge tech. A number of years ago, we actually sold that firm to a large consulting engineering, environmental, and geomatics firm called McElhaney, where I subsequently became the regional vice president looking after big groups of people. And this was a massive change between having a small, tight group of people where we were all culturally aligned to having to try to figure out, great, we've got 1,400 people, hundreds of initiatives. How do all of these things actually get aligned properly? Because that wasn't enough, at the same time, I actually started a software startup called Solve3D that actually focused on creating digitized reality virtual dioramas to help problems and so on and so forth. And this is kind of the time where I met Hugh, and I learned, if you want to make a really successful software startup, you probably should validate a pile of market ideas before you actually get going. Long story short, it took us longer than we expected, but we did finally get there. And then most recently, I've actually started up a new endeavor called Digital Skillet, where what we do is we try to help organizations build educational plans for employees and actually tie what you should know to what you should be doing. I'm a prof at the University of Calgary, where I teach infrastructure asset management, and as well, I help out Avatar in talks like this, as well as a solutions architect with groups like yourselves. Now, the genesis of the talk today is who has had a situation like this. This is actually a photo out of my house, not exactly, but you've had a great idea for a reno you're going to do, some sort of project you're going to undertake, an initiative that you're going to do at your company, and you say, yeah, you know what? We're 100% going to do this. This is going to be a great idea. This is going to hugely add value to my house or my business or my line of work. And you dive into it without thinking about it too much. And you start tearing out the studs and you realize, oh, there's black mold behind the walls here. I didn't think about that. Or, oh no, I've got to make 27 trips to Home Depot because every time I go, I buy one screw. And then I realize oh, well, actually, now I need a screwdriver for that screw. And oh, I didn't quite buy enough plywood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So who here has ever undertaken a project that didn't go the way they planned? More interestingly, who has never had a project that has not gone according to plan? It's too bad. I wanted to meet that one person. So what I've learned through countless numbers of mistakes is that critical thinking is critical to not wasting your time. It really comes down to a disciplined approach to analysis that takes a look at what kind of assumptions and biases are implicit in how I'm approaching this thing. How can we actually apply tools and techniques to bring logic to our decision making? And most importantly, once we've gotten to a spot, how do we self-reflect and continually improve, because things change over time, new information gets added to the mix. If we do this, we hope to get better project outcomes and initiative outcomes by avoiding surprises which derail our plan completely. By considering broader perspectives, we're more likely to have optimal outcomes in our mix of things that we perceive. And generally, we have smoother projects, save money, get to where we're trying to go faster. Now, because I am an engineer, I do like my flowcharts. generally, critical thinking can be broken down into this process. The first is asking the right questions. Who here is familiar with ISO 9000 or ISO 31? Perfect, right? Management systems, safety management systems. At the beginning of every single management system, you define the scope of the problem, right? You need to know what's inside your scope. What are you trying to do? Define that clearly. Once you've done that, you'll have a whole series of assumptions. We're going to talk about that in a moment. You test your assumptions. You figure out how are you going to prove that what you think is actually correct. Once you've got that, you go into brainstorming as many solutions as possible. Once you've got your big list of solutions, you realize, oh, wow, now 9 out of 10 of these is not a great idea. Prune them all down systematically. Once you've got the option you want to go with, then you put down a documented plan and a process that's going to actually take you to the solution that or to the outcome that you're looking to achieve. And once you start going down that plan, you put in a process of continual refinement and measurement to make sure that your things are still going according to plan, that what you're observing as you're moving through time and space actually meets your assumptions, that nothing weird has popped up that's going to derail you, and you constantly change your plan. It's all right to change your plan. You just want to know why you're changing your plan. Typical assumptions that we see people overlook when they're starting to go into product development are things like customer need. Everybody here is like, if you could only figure a better mousetrap, then the world will beat a path to your door. Well, yeah, except we kind of already have a lot of mousetraps. So do we really need another mousetrap? I see this in software development an awful lot where, and I'm sure we've all been here, you have some sort of process or application or task that you do repetitively. You're like, if only someone would make this work for my particular use case, that would be a huge market. We should really build an app to do this one weird specific thing. Oh yeah, you know what? We're a construction firm and we do daily timesheets, but we don't do daily timesheets exactly the same way that a painter business done. So we should totally build a software around the construction business timesheet. You'd be surprised how often customer need doesn't actually exist beyond you, which goes into also figuring out assumptions around market size, right? You want your business to be successful, which means you need to figure out who your target market is and then how big that target market actually is. And one other assumption that we often see is like, well, there's 8 billion people in the world. So if, 5% of the people need my particular product, well, that's a market of nearly 100 million people. So if I can only get 10% of that market, I'll have 10 million customers. Well, that's a great number, but is that actually really an addressable market that's achievable for you, right? So we need to validate our assumptions as far as where this is going to go in the future. Solution approach and your domain expertise. When you have a hammer, when you have a hammer, every problem's a nail, right? So the trick is very often, based on our experience, we tend to try to build solutions based on our own knowledge, when really someone sitting right next to us might have a completely different domain expertise that just comes in and actually solves the problem like that. So we have to validate that. Validate, do we actually have the resources available to us? Are our team members going to be able to put in 40 hours, 20 hours, 10 hours? How much time are people going to be putting into this project? And how long is this project really going to take, and how complex is it once we actually start going into the various sub-pieces? A good example that we show in our workshop, so at Digital Skillet, one of the things that we do is a monthly workshop on generative AI and how you can use generative AI to actually build out automated workflows. Who here has ever built an Excel macro? Who's ever wanted to build an Excel macro? There you go. So we go through how you actually do that using ChatGPT, or Copilot or whatever. But one of the assumptions that we have is always that, I keep copying and pasting this thing from this column into this column. It's really annoying. I should totally automate that task. Well, this handy dandy little chart shows that if I actually do something every day and I could shave a minute off of doing that thing every day. And a minute's actually a really long time. If you try to hold your breath, you'll agree with me on that one. Over 3 years, automating that task to reduce that task by 1 minute would save you 13 hours. Over 3 years. I've never developed a macro in less than 13 hours by the time I actually get through debugging and working through things and so on and so forth, right? So we have tools that we can use to validate assumptions. And this little chart goes up in my, like on my little office wall. And every time I think about automating something, I look at the chart, go like, nope, that's something I'm just going to continue control C, control Ving for the rest of my life. As far as brainstorming options, we break down brainstorming into a divergent phase and a convergent phase. And in the divergent phase, what we want to do is we want to create as many options as possible. This is where we're sitting with the group and we're saying there are no bad ideas. So we go out and we spitball everything we can possibly think of to put it on the sheet of paper. Once we've done that, we get into the convergent phase where we realize, no, actually, using monkeys to deliver the food is a bad idea. We're not going to do that. And we start pruning out all of the ideas that are not going to work for whatever kind of reason, right? But the divergent phase is important because without it, we don't have the feedstock to start winnowing out. And in particular, during our divergent brainstorming, one of the challenges that we have to watch out for is creating a bias. So when we start talking about risks, in risk management, this is a really big issue. When we start talking about risks, thinking about things like that, whoever speaks first at the table and puts an idea out, I guarantee you all the other ideas will start clustering around that first idea. Hey, what's the single biggest risk to our new vending machine idea? Oh, US tariffs. Okay, we put that on the thing. All of your subsequent discussion is going to go tariffs, export taxes, economies, et cetera, and you're going to focus on that as opposed to being diligent about trying to get ideas across the spectrum, personnel resourcing, space, energy, et cetera. So a good habit when you're getting into this divergent brainstorming phase is to actually restrict yourself, build a little matrix of idea, like spaces, economics, environment, energy, social impacts, marketing, things like that, and say our goal in this divergent phase is to have 3 ideas per bucket. Once you're done with one bucket, you move to the next bucket, then you move to the next bucket, you move to the next bucket. If you have time at the end of your allotted time, move back to the first and so on and so forth. But you need to guarantee space across all those dimensions. Otherwise, you're not going to have enough stuff to actually winnow down. Once you've finished that, now you've validated your assumptions. You've gone through, you've created a lot of options. You've cut them down to valid options or viable options. Now you want to actually set a course of action. Again, in the example of my bathroom reno, very often I might even get to that stage and then I just run off to the hardware store, start buying tools and punch through. This program that you're in takes a long time. You're going on a long journey. You need to document what you actually are planning to do. And I'll give the folks here at Avatar, that Miro board you folks have, who has ever seen such an amazing Miro board in their life with like the graphics and the stage gates? That thing is a remarkable tool, right? So we put down a work breakdown structure. What are the steps that we're actually going to do as we go forward? That work breakdown structure needs to be documented. It can't just be sitting in your head, because if it's sitting in your head, no one else can help you out, and you're going to lose the whole structure of the whole thing. In the WBS, you define who's doing what, because it's not helpful to have a plan if nobody knows who's actually responsible for various things. You need expected timelines, because again, it's not handy for me to say, don't worry, I'll handle the customer interviews. Everyone goes, great, Rob's got the customer interviews handled. But Rob never mentioned when they were going to do the customer interviews by. And we need to have a communications plan. If we, I always describe there's 2 ways of making chicken soup. We can all agree on the plan that we need a pot, we need some water, and we need a chicken. And we can all go together to get all of those objects and then finally return and make the chicken soup. The much more efficient approach is you go get the pot, you go get the water after you get the pot, not before, and you go get the chicken. And by the way, because there'll be surprises, if there's a surprise with getting the pot, you have to go tell them, because they're outsourcing the water right now, because we've got our agreed upon timelines, and we have a communications plan for how we're actually going to tell each other how we're coming along. Are we having weekly meetups? Are we having bi-weekly meetups? Are we using a Teams channel? How are we actually doing this communication so that we can iterate and improve on that plan as we go forward? Now, we do have a little bit of an exercise for you in terms of this critical thinking. In your Miro boards right now, you're sitting here on phase 2 and working through task 1, where some of you folks have already started getting down the path of validating some of your assumptions with regards to like your product and your users and so on and so forth. Everybody's kind of in a little bit of a different spot. But the first thing that we want you guys to do is try to choose one of your target users as far as the product or service that you're going to be doing, and look at what are your current core assumptions with regards to users, needs, and importance, and try to get as far as you can on that. The one trick, though, is we talked about how important validating assumptions is. Validating or unvalidating, devalidating, invalidating. There you go. Engineering major, not English major. Invalidating the counter assumptions. And what I mean by that is, let's assume that, actually I'm doing this right now, is I'm going to be giving a TED talk on the importance of digital literacy for organizations. And one of the slides that I envision that I'd like to have is showcasing how little people know about their basic office productivity tools. So here's a fun stat. When I ask Google or ChatGPT or so on and so forth, hey, give me some stats on how little people know about their office productivity tools, one stat that I'm going to get is the average 53% of all the commands used in Excel boil down to 3 simple commands. So people actually aren't using all the functionality in Excel. Wow, that's a great stat to put up. Except I'm not proving or disproving my counterfactual, which is maybe I should be asking, hey, computer or Google or ChatGPT, provide me with some stats that prove that actually people use Excel very effectively. Because for all I know, that 53% of usage to 3 commands identifies 95% of the value that spreadsheet can actually provide me. So simply going out and trying to search for proof to support your assumptions leads to confirmation bias. You equally have to go and try to find proof that invalidates your assumption or validates the counter assumption, because then you can be assured that you don't have any blind spots. At the same time, what we'd ask you to do is then how would you test both of those hypotheses, that initial hypothesis and the countervailing hypothesis? We're going to give them 15 minutes. Oh, I'll hold.
Just pause, take a breath. Okay. Just before we move into the activity, I want to do 2 things. Firstly, I want to give you the opportunity to ask a question. You've had a lot of information come at you in fairly quick order. You're super bright, but it is Friday afternoon, and sometimes there's moments of confusion or whatever. So hold that thought for a second while I explain the second piece. I want to go into the Miro and I want to show you a team that really is cranking it and why. And then also focus your attention on what we're talking about here in terms of assumptions and setting them as part of the process of having a hypothesis for the problem and the needs and the importance of that problem and it being solved, okay? So I'm going to do that in a moment. Has anybody got any questions for Rob about what he's put over here from a critical thinking point of view? Does anything resonate? Do you disagree with anything? Anybody online? Can you see? Hi.
Okay. So my question is, when you're going through the critical thinking, I know you have that create your action plan and you go out there, but I find that it's so easy to continue through that loop without going into action. So I'm curious if you're shaking your head. So I feel like you have something to say.
Absolutely. Fantastic question. There are actually a couple pitfalls that we need to avoid when we're getting into this critical thinking. And the one absolute one is this whole paralysis by analysis, right? You need to get to the execution plan state. You could spend forever in the assumptions validation stage, right? Like, how do I actually know for sure that people want my new brand of chewing gum? I can do market assessments. I have a whole pile of interviews I can do, but until I actually put that thing out there in the world, I won't 100% know. So you do need to put a time limit. And that's why, for example, in the divergent example, I say, make a series of buckets. And as soon as you have 3 per bucket, you call it, and you say, we got to move on to the next phase. The same thing, making a work breakdown structure, you got to make a return on investment for how complicated is the problem. If my problem is, hey, I got home and I don't have groceries for dinner and I want to make a pizza, I just go to the grocery store and go buy tomatoes, onions, ham, whatever, and I go make a pizza. I certainly don't sit down and say, to my kids, like, well, I know it's 6 o'clock, but let's validate our assumptions. They're like, do we really want pizza? Okay, well, let's divergent think. What could have, right? Like at some point, you cut this down and you just go. So absolutely, you need to set limits to when you're satisfied and move along. Check the return on investment. And then as well, recognize that a lot of your assumptions, even if you start to validate them, have error bars on them. And you're going to start stacking unknowns on top of unknowns on top of unknowns that might end up like that error multiplies over time. So you do the best you can and you move forward. But the important thing is that at least by applying this approach, you hopefully resolve your unknown unknowns to a satisfactory result. And I hope that addresses kind of your point. Yes. I'm just going to stand here.
Oh, wow. We're very close together now. Okay. Nice. We can do a duet if you want. We need to go to Duckies if you want to. Nice. I want to ask you your opinion about balancing sort of intuition and sort of relying on your experiences versus the risk of allowing biases to creep into your perspectives, because that's something I'm weighing a lot right now, is how much do I lean on my experiences and lean on my intuition, which generally has helped me be pretty productive, versus sort of trying to nip bias in the butt and keep an open mind.
Yeah, for sure. This comes back to this return on investment question to a certain extent. As I pointed out, one of your big assumptions is always weighing whether you're being biased by your own domain expertise, right? And I've found in my life both to be true. How's that for a very distinct validate your assumptions answer there? To be successful, intuition is required, right? You have to have a gut feel that this is going to work or this is not going to work, because I guess back to your point, there's too many variables and courses of action to systematically evaluate all of them. You need to have intuition to simply say, yep, we're ready to go, or this is going to work, or I feel good about this. And at the end of the day, isn't that the whole point of experience, is that as we get more experience from our life, we kind of know that, yes, this is a good idea and this is going to work, as opposed to having to rehash. Who here is aware of this, that spectrum going from unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent to consciously competent to unconsciously competent, in terms of getting better and better at doing things, right? And a lot of people think that the ideal outcome is being unconsciously competent, because then you're just good at it. Well, that's not actually the ideal one. The ideal one is to be consciously competent, because at that point you're comfortable that your intuition's driving you in the right way, but you're still mindful of the fact that times change. The environment, what I was doing 10 years ago might not be appropriate now. So I've got to do a couple checks here and there. So I would say a balanced approach to like intuition as being the primary driver, but then using critical thinking to sort of like cover your back and make sure that there's no nasty surprises is the ideal outcome there. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it.
We better go.